Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Within days of imposing tariffs on 8 European countries, Donald Trump has withdrawn the tariffs and assured the world he will not use force to acquire Greenland. Instead, it seems he's agreed to terms that will not give him ownership and control of the Arctic island. So has he backed down? Is that another example of what his critics call taco? Trump always chickens out? And what should we make of the Board of Peace, whose signing ceremony was held yesterday? And what are the implications for the United Nations? Those are the issues I shall raise today with the defense editor of The Economist, Shashank Joshi. Mr. Joshi joins me live from London. Shashank Joshi, within days of imposing 10% tariffs on 8 European countries, Trump has withdrawn the tariffs and he's announced that he has a deal on Greenland, which he calls the ultimate long-term deal. And he says it's a deal that everybody is happy with. So let me start by asking, what do we know about the terms of this deal? What are the facts, so to speak?
Good afternoon, Karen. It's great to talk to you again. I would emphasize, despite President Trump's claim, we don't actually have a deal. We have what he initially described as not even a framework of a deal, but the concepts of a framework of a deal. So clearly we have the principles that Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, who has been very sort of flattering of Trump, trying to work with him in private, has discussed with the president and dangled to the president. But actually, we don't have a deal that has then been agreed between the Danes and the Americans. And of course, the Danes are the only ones who can agree to a settlement, a deal that would actually satisfy Trump. Now, what do we know of this framework? Well, what we know is that Mark Rutte has said he did not discuss the sovereignty of Greenland with Donald Trump. So in other words, he didn't discuss ownership. I had earlier thought perhaps the two sides would discuss the prospect of something akin to a sovereign base agreement, a sovereign base. And the precedent there, of course, is the British base on Cyprus, RAF Akrotiri, which is a very long-standing, very significant base. But if Rutte says he didn't discuss sovereignty, then it seems to me what we may be looking at, and I stress may, is something more akin to a long-term lease. Perhaps you could compare it to Hong Kong or another sort of territorial lease. There are other elements to the deal as well, we think, including potentially something around minerals, although the Danish Prime Minister says again, she's not aware of any specific agreement on minerals, and perhaps joint vetting or joint approval of things like Chinese and Russian investment in dual use infrastructure in Greenland. So the long and short of his current is we don't have a deal. We don't know the details of what's been agreed, but it doesn't seem that Trump has got what he wanted, which is acquisition and ownership of Greenland. It does seem to me he has backed down on that.
Let me pick up, Shashank Joshi, on some of the things you said, because they will come as news to the audience in India. It seems that he's no longer seeking control, or at least no longer getting control of ownership or control of Greenland. He seems to be settling, from what we can make out, for territory where American bases can be built. If that's all he's getting, Is it a climb down?
If that's correct, absolutely, this is a huge climb down. I was in Davos, Karen. I'm just back from Davos. I heard him speak to that audience, and he said he took force off the table. He wouldn't use military force, he said, or he didn't intend to. But he struck a very menacing tone in which he said he demanded immediate negotiations over the acquisition of Greenland, not the right to build bases, not access, not more European involvement, acquisition of Greenland. And he emphasized again and again, even as he confused Greenland with the country of Iceland on a number of occasions, his demand for ownership. And it doesn't seem like that's what he will be ultimately getting. In that sense, it is a clear climb down.
Now, as you said, the whole thing hinges on the terms on which these pockets of territory are being made available to America to build bases. If they are made available in perpetuity, in which case he will have eaten into Greenland sovereignty, and it will be, I presume, less of a climb down. But if they are only 99 or 100-year leases, like, say, Hong Kong and Macau, it's a much more significant climb down. Am I right in putting it like that?
I think that's a very fair summary, Karen. Leases themselves are very strange. Of course, the British lease with Hong Kong was a colonial era arrangement that was agreed at the end of the 19th century. And it was agreed under what the Chinese would, of course, correctly describe as unequal terms, under coercive pressure. This was not a lease freely entered into by two equal parties engaging in diplomacy. And there's something of that coercive approach to Donald Trump with Greenland today. This is a negotiation taking place under the shadow of economic and military threats. And indeed, as I come back to Davos, his speech, he said, if you say yes, we will be very appreciative. And then he added, in the tone becoming of a mafia boss in a Martin Scorsese film, if you say no, we will remember. And those are the terms under which this is taking place. Now, the other thing I have to say is very clearly, when you give the Americans parcels of land to build these bases, this could have been done at any time in the past 12 months. America, I will remind your viewers, had a number of military bases on Greenland that it shut down and rolled up over the last 30, 40 years since the Cold War. Danes would have been absolutely happy to reopen some of those bases with or without the cessation of territory. And so I think in that sense, Trump may be getting something, the ability to build bases, but it's nothing he could not have secured by a perfectly ordinary diplomatic discussion with Denmark last year.
In fact, what he's getting could be no more than what he already had through the 1951 treaty between America and Denmark. They had 17 bases under that treaty. They shut them down. He may be getting bases back again almost on the same terms as he had them.
Well, yes, of course, I should remind people that agreement in 1951 was then revised in 2004, which slightly changed the terms of it. For example, it obliged America to consult with Denmark on the terms of future military deployments. And perhaps Donald Trump could say that was an infringement on his right to operate untrammeled. Having spoken to American officials, including those who served under other administrations, I will say there has been some American grumbling, you might call it, that Denmark has been so cautious around the sensitivities of Greenlanders, who, of course, seek independence from Denmark and view that relationship as a colonial one, that they have been reluctant to authorize things like military exercises. I asked one former American official, was there anything you wish you could have done on Greenland that the Danes wouldn't let you? And they said, well, look, let me ask you a question. How many military exercises have you seen on Greenland in the past 20 years? The implication being that the Danes had resisted that. So perhaps Trump is now expanding his freedom of maneuver to do some of those things. And I suspect, and this is I must emphasize my supposition, you may see a renegotiation, a revision of that 1951 agreement and the 2004 revision to it, which maybe gives Donald Trump in America more rights, more freedom of action. But again, I emphasize that would have been possible without these gangster-like threats that we have seen in the last several months.
In which case, let me put to you the question I framed this interview with. To what extent is the Greenland affair, if I can call it that, likely to be remembered as another example of taco? Trump always chickens out. Because if he's climbed down, undoubtedly his critics will raise that charge again.
I think you're right. I think it can be chalked up to that. And look, some of this is to do with savvy diplomacy spearheaded by Mark Rutte, whose public style of flattering Mr. Trump with effusive, emollient language, famously calling him daddy at the NATO summit last year and sending these florid text messages. That's not to everyone's taste. I interviewed Mark Rutte a few months ago, and he said, yep, look, I recognize that some people wince at this, but in a way, it's the price of doing diplomacy with Trump, that sort of flattery. What I will say is that for me, watching this from a European standpoint, this has been a watershed for Europe because we've heard from the Americans, look, Europe is weak. We could invade Greenland at any time. Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff in the White House, said no one could stop us. No one would resist. Scott Bessent has said, the Europeans are irrelevant. All of that may have a kernel of truth to it. Europe is weak relative to America. Most countries, most blocs are. But what I think we have realized is that just because you have escalation dominance doesn't mean you don't pay a heavy price for attempting to use that dominance. And what we saw is that Europe standing firm with the UK, with non-EU partners, with Canada, and saying to Donald Trump, this is a red line, and then using the threat of selling off American bonds and treasuries as well, that moved the American markets on the day before Donald Trump arrived in Davos. And those market movements, I think, may have spooked Donald Trump because he does not like to see the Dow fall. He does not like to see gilts rise in that way. And so what happened is, although America, of course, can conquer Greenland anytime it likes, it became clear Europe can impose a heavy price for these kind of adventures. And I think that is a lesson Europe will take into the next round of these shenanigans, because with Donald Trump, the negotiation is never done. It is merely deferred to the next day.
So like what happened with China 6-7 months ago, when the bond market and the treasuries market adversely went against the dollar, the same thing has happened again, and it spooked Trump.
Yes, and I can't read the mind of Donald Trump. I can't pretend I know for sure that the market movements were the thing that caused him to turn up in Davos and say, I'm taking military force off the table. I can't say for certainty they were the thing that led him to perhaps agree with Mark Rutte, something short of his original ambitions. And look, I can't tell you, Karan, either that he won't, this deal won't collapse and that he won't come back to this and say, I'm not happy with it. When he hears interviews like the one I'm doing now, when he hears us talk and he looks at the tweets and things being said about him, we know Donald Trump's psychology. He may think, actually, I don't want to be humiliated. I'm now going to reopen this issue. The threats are back on the table. So I emphasize, this isn't the end of the story. But by and large, yes, I think that those market movements have spooked him, and he's realized he's bitten off more than he can chew. And he will perhaps turn his attention to other crises, including Iran, where he's building up substantial military forces in the Persian Gulf, or even Cuba, where I think the Americans now want to seek the next act of regime change in the Caribbean.
So let me end this section by quoting the Danish Foreign Minister, Lars Rasmussen. He said to Reuters, what is crucial for us is that we get to end this with respect for the integrity and sovereignty of the Kingdom of Denmark and the right of the Greenlandic people to self-determination. That seems to corroborate the belief, and it's a belief that's run through our interview, that Trump has climbed down. How much, we can't say for certain, but it's not what he was asking for when he began this operation.
No, you're absolutely right. But what I must also emphasize is that his demand for ownership was predicated on a series of claims that I can only describe as exaggerated or outright false. For example, the belief that only ownership could protect America's plans for a missile defense architecture known as Golden Dome. In fact, Karan, as you probably know, there has been an early warning radar on Greenland at a site called Thule and more recently renamed Pituffik for more than 50 years. Not the same radar, but a varying array of radars. He claims that only America could protect this territory and that the Danes and Europeans couldn't, which of course implies that he wouldn't protect any territory that he doesn't own, which is an alarming lesson for allies. And he finally claims that the Danes would likely give away this territory to the Chinese or the Russians. They would simply cede it. There is no basis to believe any of these things. And so while he may have backed down on ownership, I would say that I wouldn't forget the fact that although he's backed down, American national interests around their presence on Greenland, their use of Greenland for early warning radar for missiles, their use of Greenland for Arctic monitoring, their cooperation with Europeans, all of that can continue to the mutual benefit of Americans, Europeans, and NATO. So this is not designed to humiliate Donald Trump. This is a mutually beneficial solution that I hope will continue to protect European security.
And you can add to that the fact that he will also get some claim and some rights to the minerals and the oil that is supposed to be under Greenland. He gets some right to that as well.
That would seem so. Again, I haven't seen the final settlement, so I can't say that with any certainty. But if that's the case, I would again emphasize to you that this is based on a series of exaggerated assumptions about the accessibility of those rare earth materials and oil under Greenland. There have been many efforts to mine those. Indeed, my colleagues at The Economist have written an excellent briefing in this week's issue looking at those claims. And our conclusion is that fundamentally it would be incredibly prohibitive, incredibly expensive, incredibly difficult, and not to mention ecologically damaging to try to really get to those materials and minerals. So much as with Venezuela, where he claimed, look, this country is sitting on some of the biggest oil reserves in the world, that may be true, but is it economically and commercially viable to get to those? Not to the degree that the president appears to think.
Let's then briefly, Shashank Joshi, come to Trump's Board of Peace, whose signing ceremony was held yesterday in Davos. Trump says it's the most consequential body ever created. How do you view it? Do you see it as a structure designed to handle Gaza or as a rival to the United Nations?
I see it as a geopolitical extension of the model that Donald Trump has created in his Mar-a-Lago club at Florida. It is a country club in which countries vie for his attention, which is why a lot of countries have signed up. You know, Pakistan has signed up, for instance. It's not because they think the Board of Peace is going to be some great geopolitical actor that will solve crises. It's because this is a great opportunity to get face-to-face time with Donald Trump if you were a leader of these countries. The idea that you would pay $1 billion for permanent membership in a club that would be led in perpetuity by Mr. Trump, who would then name his successor in some kind of bizarre monarchical model, I think is just absolutely delusional and strange. Now, this original model designed to oversee the Gaza peace process had some viability to it. What has emerged is something completely different. It is a pet project that appears to be in the pocket of Donald Trump personally. And if you look at Europe, only 2 EU countries have signed up. Bulgaria, which was put under a great deal of pressure, and Viktor Orban's Hungary, which of course is more ideologically inclined to the likes of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin anyway. No other EU country has signed up. The Chinese haven't signed up, saying they think this is a transparent effort to try to marginalize the United Nations. The Indians haven't signed up because although India, as you know, is a country that has reservations about the current system of global governance, does not wish to see that replaced with a capricious institution led by the President of the United States in his personal capacity, along with his son-in-law and others. So I think that this is a model that may have been designed with some good intentions with my mind with Gaza, but will ultimately have relatively little relevance in tackling and addressing the great crises and conflicts of our time beyond that region, in the South American region, in the Americas, in Europe, in South Asia, in East Asia. This looks to me like a really vanity project by the president himself.
In fact, yesterday, as I saw the 19 heads of government and state sitting on the stage beside Donald Trump, I got the feeling that a very large number of them are in fact autocrats and monarchs. Many of them from the Middle East, where they have a vested interest in being part of the venture. But the Canadians, for instance, have had their invitation withdrawn today. The Russians haven't made up their mind. The Chinese have said they're not joining. France and Britain hasn't joined. So what do you make of this membership?
Well, it's something of a joke. It's something of a joke. And Europeans are being very polite, but in private, they are rolling their eyes and are bewildered by this strange model that is clearly designed to potentially enrich the president, that is designed to consolidate his personal grip, beyond his presidency for life, and that is designed to undermine parallel multilateral institutions, including things like the G7, which of course President Trump has disliked because it refused to readmit Russia, and the NATO alliance and the United Nations. So they see it as an effort to undermine existing global governance. But let's be clear here, Karan. It's difficult for us to say this as journalists, but sometimes we must call a spade a spade. The president is not fully well. He's not with his cognitive capacities are declining. We see his rants, we see his ramblings. Indeed, when France declined to join the Board of Peace, what did he do? Did he say, okay, let's talk about this, let's move on? He threatened to impose 200% tariffs on French wine. When Mark Carney gave a speech on the new global order and middle powers at Davos, and it irritated Trump, what did he do? He rescinded the invite to Canada to join the Board of Peace, despite Canada's extensive involvement in issues of global governance, peacekeeping, and so on. So does that look to you or anyone like a serious effort at international diplomacy? Or does it look like yet another one of these haphazard, half-baked diplomatic schemes cooked up by the president and pushed for his personal advancement rather than the interests of his country or his allies?
Two very quick questions before I let you go, Shashank Joshi. You mentioned that this would enrich the president. Is that $1 billion that they pay after 3 years to become permanent members to go into the pocket of Donald Trump?
We don't know. And I want to be very clear. We don't know where it goes, but that's exactly the problem. Right? The opacity of schemes like this. The same thing with the Venezuela escrow scheme. Trump taking Venezuelan oil, selling it on behalf of Venezuela, insisting it will benefit the Venezuelan people. But where is this money going to go in the escrow scheme? Some of it will be given to the Venezuelans. What share will Trump take? What share will go to Venezuela's existing creditors? These are all very opaque issues because policy is made in such an unpredictable way. And therefore, I can't rule out that this money, some of it, will basically enrich the president or his personal advisors and his hangers-on.
Finally, how do you see the future of the United Nations in this background? The Board of Peace looks like a rival body. On top of that, Trump has withdrawn America from 66 multilateral organizations and treaties, nearly half of whom were affiliated with the United Nations. So where does the UN stand today, and what do its prospects look like?
We all know the United Nations has major problems. We all know that the Security Council is not necessarily representative of the distribution of global power today. We know that the Security Council is deadlocked because of the veto system in key moments. We know that the withdrawal of US funding for institutions, UN agencies and institutions, has neutered the UN's power to act in many areas. But ultimately, the United Nations has the great benefit of legitimacy through its composition, through its breadth, through the sheer scale of the General Assembly, through the rotating membership of the Security Council that allows other countries to play a part in the cockpit of global power in this way. And it is imperfect. I'm not defending every element of it, but it has a level of legitimacy and depth that institutions like the Board of Peace will never have. And so that's ultimately why, China may not like the UN, it may have reservations about the UN, but it is fighting for influence at the top of UN bodies and agencies. It wants to influence UN peacekeeping. It wants to influence UN agencies about telecommunications. It does not want to abdicate its responsibility from those. And like it or love it, that is where lots of the geopolitical action will still remain.
Shashank Joshi, thank you very much for the time you've given me, and thank you very much for your analysis, both of the Board of Peace as well as Trump's new deal, if deal is the right word, on Greenland.
Thank you for having me.
Stay safe.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times. And if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.